The first lesson from 1 Kings, chapter 19. Hear the words of old when God spoke through the prophets. Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah, saying, "So may the gods do to me, and more also, if I do not make your life like the life of one of them by this time tomorrow." Then he was afraid. He got up and fled for his life, and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and he left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a solitary broom tree. He asked that he might die. "It is enough now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am no better than my ancestors." Then later he got up and ate and drank. Then he went in the strength of that food for 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mount of God. At that place he came to a cave and spent the night there. Then the word of the Lord came to him, saying, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He answered, I've been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they are seeking my life to take it away. He said, "Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Now there was a great wind, so strong that it was splitting mountains and breaking rocks in pieces before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a sound of sheer silence. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood at the entrance to the cave. There came a voice to him that said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He answered, "I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they are seeking my life to take it away." Then the Lord said to him, "Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus, and when you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael as king over Aram." Here ends the reading from the Hebrew text.
Hear what the Spirit is saying to the church through Luke. Then they arrived at the country of the Gerasenes, which is opposite of Galilee. As he stepped out on land, a man of the city who had demons met him. For a long time he had worn no clothes, and he did not live in a house, but in the tombs. When he saw Jesus, he fell down before him and shouted at the top of his voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torment me." For Jesus had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man. For many times it had seized him. He was kept under guard and bound with chains and shackles. But he would break the bonds and be driven by the demon into the wilds. Jesus then asked him, "What is your name?" He said, "Legion," for many demons had entered him. They begged him not to order them to go back into the abyss. Now there on the hillside was a large herd of swine feeding, and the demons begged Jesus to let them enter these. So he gave them permission. Then the demons came out of the man and entered the swine, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and were all drowned. When the swineherds saw what had happened, they ran off and told it in the city and in the country. Then people came out to see what had happened, and when they came to Jesus, they found the man from whom the demons had gone sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those who had seen it told them how the one who had been possessed by demons had been healed. Then all the people of the surrounding country of the Gerasenes asked Jesus to leave them, for they were seized with great fear. So he got into the boat and returned. The man from whom the demons had gone begged that he might be with him, but Jesus sent him away, saying, "Return to your home and declare how much God has done for you." So he went away, proclaiming throughout the city how much Jesus had done for him. Holy wisdom, holy word. So King Ahab tells his wife Jezebel all that Elijah had done. Now, how do you think what was he thinking, how that would go over? She was a Baal worshiper. But anyway, so he had killed 450 of the prophets, the Baal prophets. Now his wife sends a message to Elijah that she wants to kill him. So he flees in fear to the wilderness, where he prays to God that he might die. And there was couple little verses that we missed, that I forgot to put in, or didn't choose to put in, but they were important. And they were that an angel came to him when he was in the wilderness and told him to eat the bread that was there and to drink the water. And this angel came a couple of times. He was touched by that angel, strengthened with food and water, and continued on for 40 days and 40 nights, ending up in a cave or a shelter. And there, God speaks to him. "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Now, I don't think God would say it quite like I just did, but you get the message. Elijah holds nothing back. As God's loyal servant, he was defending God, and now he is being hunted. He was faithful. It was the Israelites who had abandoned God, and now he was alone and abandoned. It's a bit reminiscent of Job in terms of justifying his righteousness and questioning why bad things were happening to him. A deep despair and questioning for Elijah that reflects what so many human beings have suffered when they've experienced and when we have experienced a tragedy or loss, for example, of a loved one. God listens and then tells Elijah to go stand on a mountain and listen for God about to pass by. In that time, in the time of Moses, it was believed that God was in the wind and in the earthquakes and in the fire. So Elijah went and he stood on the mountain. When the wind came, God was not in the wind. When the earthquake came, God was not in the earthquake. When the fire came, God was not in the fire. Then there was sheer silence. God speaks to him again. "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Again, Elijah repeats himself, word for word. Then God tells him to return to the wilderness of Damascus, by way of the wilderness. And Elijah receives, however, no promises, no guarantees from God. To do so means Elijah must face his fears and continue to be God's prophet. What he has now, however, is his experience of God's presence being with him. This is new in the evolution of the people's understanding of God. God with the people in their lives. I remember when I worked as a chaplain in a Boston hospital and I was on duty, it was very early in my time there. A young man, Mike, brought his fiancée, who'd been complaining of a severe headache that morning, into the hospital. She'd gone into a coma. The doctors told him that she wasn't going to be coming out of it because she was brain dead. I was with Mike for hours all through that ordeal. And there was nothing to say that could reach such shock and such sorrow. And almost a year later, he wanted to meet with me to talk about what had happened. He poured out the whole story from the beginning of their relationship until that day in the hospital, and then what had transpired after that. He said that he had become very fearful, very mistrusting, and he needed to face his fears. And the only way that he knew to do that was by coming back to the hospital and having the conversation we were having. Sometimes when people suffer such a tragedy, all we can do is to be present, a silent presence. When we are the ones suffering, it does make a difference when another is present to witness that suffering. Maybe a hand held or just a touch, like an angel. Now, Jesus shows us something more in the story of the man possessed by the demon. We hear of him, a Gentile, cast out from his own community, encounters Jesus, who witnesses his suffering. We come to see that much like the young girl Jesus released, who was also possessed, that some of the people around that experience did really stand in awe, and others did not appreciate it. It meant for the parents of the young girl a loss of their income, and they were very angry. For the people who witnessed the spirits coming out of the man and into the swine who ran off the cliff into the lake, they became afraid and asked Jesus to leave. Now, it doesn't say that the owner of the swine was part of that group or not. The man, however, free, wanted to be with Jesus, but Jesus said, "Return to your home and declare how much God has done for you." He was very aware that it was God's doing. The free man had experienced God's grace, but as a rehabilitated member of the Gerasene community, he had a story to tell of God's healing power that would continue to be present to them and to their community. There are times, we understand now through the way of Jesus, that we must take nonviolent stands in our communities for those who have no voice, when all we might hear from God is sheer silence. We take those stands, like saying no to separating babies and children from their parents at the border, and letting those children suffer on so many levels, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. For many, it means facing fears that have sheltered in one place, provided safety from being seen and perhaps suffering too. Laying down one's life for a friend is one thing, but we are called to lay it down for strangers. It's so easy to hide in safety with friends, with our justifications, with our fears intact. We might hear, if we listen to the voice of God saying to us, "Why are you here?" God wants to know. We can say all the things we've been through. We can list all of our hardships, because being a human being is difficult. It really, really is. I'm old enough I can say that. The things going on in society right now are more than difficult. The powers are strong. There seems to be a battle waging for our very souls. Why not just ignore it and hope it goes away? Let's go to a cave. So go ahead and tell God all the reasons that you are afraid. There's no judgment. God is listening. Then wait for it. God will say, "Why are you here?" And then we'll go through it again and wait for it And God will say, get out there and attend to my people. Attend to my children. Everyone is made in my image and likeness. Some of us at times in our lives when we are overwhelmed may also enter the gate of despair and then the temptation to deny. At those times we may have experienced an angel that touched us, giving us strength to carry on through the days ahead. When my godchild, whom I had been involved in caring for, I'd lived with the family for a number of years, and especially when her parents needed time out or were away, I had grown very close to this child. She grew up, she married and had a daughter of her own, and one Thanksgiving day she was killed in an auto accident. My grief would often surprise me and overwhelm me. Even one time I was just standing in a grocery store, walking down an aisle, and I saw the Gerber's baby food, and it just zapped me, and there I was on the floor in the aisle. A person came by and literally just touched me. I was touched by an angel. And that touch didn't leave me until I was able to stand again. And there are times when we have literal deaths in our lives that render us into deep grief. And then there are times when we have death that comes close through various losses. You as a congregation have had a little death, or a medium death, or a big death, depending on where you're at, when your previous pastor left. And I should say pastors, because Mario was one as well. And there's a myriad of responses that you all may have. There may be relief. There may be sadness and grief. There may be a wish that I fill his shoes and do all the things that he had done. Of course, that's not going to happen. But I'm not him. But I can be with you through this time, through this transition. What reflections I have here are brief. But we know from the story that was read by Larry in 1 Kings about Elijah, and also the healing that Jesus did of the man possessed. We know that the people were changing over the many years in their understanding and relationship with God. We can see an evolution of that. So I think the Elijah story is pivotal because that's where we begin to hear of God's presence and then being fulfilled in Jesus, being present. So through the revelations of Jesus, we hear from scriptural testimonies and as a people how God responds to us as individuals and as people. God works with our limitations and our weaknesses, is able to heal us from the things that possess us, the legions. And the legions can be everything that possess us, that distract us, that keep us separate, confined by fear. Or it can be legions. It may have referred to the powers at work within the system of governance, be it Rome or even the United States. For within every system, there are forces to control, with judgments on who is worthy, who is favored, who will be sacrificed in wars, decisions that take into account consequences, and those decisions that don't. All that we must contend with, dear ones and dear friends, is that God gives us God's self, and that we here give ourselves to one another, not to hide and justify, not to accept the legions surrounding us. This is not a cave. This is a womb that gives birth. But to be for one another in ways that encourage faith in God, that strengthen and this precious body which we are a part of. We can be whole in the midst of it all. And the story goes on for sure. And we will make it together. Amen.